Good morning, evening, daytime, whenever you're actually listening to this. Different cast this year, but hopefully the same takes and hopefully better takes. John, mad at you. No, congrats to John. He's off doing his own little personal thing and crushing it in the real world. So John won't be with us. I have a sneaky suspicion John is going to jump in at some point when he gets the itch at listening to one of these shows, because I know he's listening. And then Ryan, who knows? Ryan will be here when Ryan's here. I'm sure Ryan will fill in at some point, but he's also crushing it in his day-to-day job. So they are high rolling us. For those of you who don't know, Jeff Bell. Hi, Jeff.
Hey, how's it going? No, it's great to be here. I've listened to the show for a long time and thrilled to be with you guys. You know, having been with Football Guys for the last year plus, you're people that I look up to, and so I'm excited to share this time with you.
Well, we're glad that you're here, and I know that you're crushing it on the social media platforms, which I personally don't really have. So, yeah, it could be like 2 a.m. and Jeff is still on Twitter. So he's seemingly posting more tweets than Elon Musk these days. But we're gonna jump into some DFS. It's week 1, boys, and we're gonna have some fun. Doing things a little bit different, so a little less structured than just your quarterback, running back, wide receiver. We're gonna be more free form. We're gonna talk about strategy. We're gonna have some fun with it. So Phil, talk to me about week 1. What's your thoughts here? How are we thinking about the overall slate? Where are we going? Like, just strategy in general. Did we learn anything from last year?
Sure. So, well, first of all, I just want to tell everybody out there that they're lucky that I'm not crushing it in the real world. So I am still here, and we'll see how that goes with the takes. For week 1, they should be good. I'm kind of like the Dos Equis guy, where I don't always win thousands of dollars playing GPPs, but when I have, it's been in week 1 the last couple of seasons. Nothing to write home about after week 1, unfortunately, but week 1 has treated me good. And I think it's because the projection sites, the optimizers, your favorite analysts, they all have the least reliable data that they're going to have all year. And I think the takeaway for me there is that sometimes maybe too much data clouds my process a little bit and takes me off the best plays. So just as an example, specific to this slate, the Dolphins at Chargers, I think, is pretty clearly the premier game on the slate that we want the most exposure to, you know. And maybe in most weeks when I look at ownership percentages or I look at projections and I see the amount of teams that are going to be piled on this game, maybe it would take me off that game. But in week 1, I actually think I just saw Jeff put up a tweet to this effect, and he might not have been talking about DFS, but I think it applies. And that's that we kind of don't know what we don't know. So make sure that you take advantage of what you do know. And I think we do know that game is going to be high scoring. And I'm definitely going to make that the foundation of my plans, probably in cash games and in GPPs.
Jeff, what are your thoughts heading into the season?
Yeah, I think the same thing. You know, use the information that we do have, and we know that Vegas is very good on the numbers, and I think that Phil was right there on that Dolphins Chargers game. Other games that I have circled would be the Vikings Bucks game. I think that could get out of hand a little bit. The Jaguars Colts game, in terms of the Jaguars explosive offense and then the Colts playing catch up a little bit. And then the Browns Bengals is funny because it seems like every year you get one crazy Browns Bengals game and then you get one 6-3 Browns Bengals game. So those are the highest ones that I've kind of circled and looking at. And then throughout the slate, I think Philly's exactly right there too, kind of deferring to safety. One of the things with week 1 here, a lot of the values are rookies. And so those stepping in, we've seen some big rookie performances quickly. At the same time, we've seen some other rookies that we think that are going to be key members of their offense and let down quite a bit. I know a couple years ago, the Bryan Edwards hype in the preseason, and everybody was ready to go with him as a cheap play, and that did not work. So now I think that all that is great. You defer to, I think the Vegas is the best experts that we have right now.
I think we're the best experts that we have.
Yeah, that too.
I'm glad you guys don't know what you're talking about or not confident, because I sure am. And I don't like that. I don't like the Dolphins game. I'm just not on it. So Jacksonville, Indy, I am. I think that is a potential shootout. And then sneaky one, I think New Orleans, Tennessee is going to be a little bit of a back and forth. New Orleans hasn't been able to stop the run. They lost some defensive ends in Marcus Davenport and then David Onyemata, maybe his name. And then Tennessee can't stop the pass. Like we've seen that last year, 290 yards passing per game to opposing quarterbacks. So could Derek Carr, he's not going to be popular, but he could be a guy that we're looking at. Let's start cash games, and then we'll go to GPPs, and then we'll go to values, and then we'll go to stacks. Jeff, new guy comes up first. Cash game. Are you playing Anthony Richardson and just biting the bullet? I think that's the question everybody needs to ask themselves.
Yeah, I mean, you took the words right out of my mouth. That was going to be the first place that I went. I think he's the lower entry point to step into cash games and grab that quarterback. I expect that he'll be chasing. We see Jonathan Taylor out of that lineup. We don't know if Zach Moss is going to be playing, so I think that you'll see the production in the rushing game, if not being forced to throw as well. And so that was on the tip of my tongue and the first place that I was going to go. Some other ones that I like a little bit more in cash would be Geno Smith is probably around there, maybe on the higher end of cash. And then, if you want to go to Justin Herbert on that Dolphins Chargers game, or even Tua on the other side of that one.
Yeah, I think for me, it's Richardson or Geno Smith or even Deshaun Watson, I think is interesting just because the Bengals are very good against the run, but they have struggled in some passing situations before. And look, Deshaun Watson has some questions to answer, both personally and professionally, but we're only talking about professional here. So, Phil, do you care about cash?
I do, actually. I started playing in one 10-man tournament, and if any of my opponents, which are all friends of mine, are listening to this, they'll be glad to know that even though it's a 10-man, I just set a cash game lineup with one stack, and I win an inordinate amount of these weekly games because they really stink and have no concept of how to create a DFS lineup. So it's kind of gotten me into cash games a little, even though my forte is usually GPPs. For me, I kind of tuned out on both of you guys because it's Justin Herbert in cash, and for me, it's not close. He's as talented as any quarterback on the slate, yet he's QB5 in a field that doesn't include Mahomes and Josh Allen. It's the highest game total. They're a home favorite. All the reasons that you should be drafting him this year apply this week. New offensive coordinator, fully healthy after the ribs and shoulder injury. And if I were a better analyst than I am, I would have the numbers on this. But how many games has Herbert played with a healthy Austin Eckler, Keenan Allen, and Mike Williams, like all in the lineup, healthy, 100% at the same time? It feels like it's week one every season. So I'm into that. I think that there's a lot going in Herbert's favor.
I think that's a good call out. I did the Chargers for our football guys training camp update. So I was reading the Chargers news every single week, and that new offense I think is going to be very explosive for Herbert. The addition of, I don't know how much Quentin Johnson's going to play early on, but adding Gerald Everett in there. And I think that this will be, you're exactly right. It'll be back and forth game.
Okay. So I'm going to lump wide receivers and running backs together. I think let's just talk through strategy as far as, are you spending up at a certain position? Are you spending down at others? Where are you saving some money? Phil, it sounds like you got some money to save. For me, it depends on the site. Like on FanDuel, J.K. Dobbins is super cheap at 6,500 against Houston. Like that pops immediately as far as he's a guy I'm going to want to play. And then I talked about it a little bit. I don't know if it's going to be popular. It probably won't be. But I think as of Thursday night when we're recording this, I really like Derrick Henry to go over 100 yards this week. So he had 50, like people forget he had 1,500 yards last year. And I think a lot of people think he's just washed up because of some contract things and some like that offense isn't really sexy. I don't know that a lot of people are going to be on him, and maybe we'll talk about him as a GPP play. And then Aaron Jones is the last guy at running back that I really like. Talk about health. I think Aaron Jones sort of falls into that category as far as not always healthy. And Chicago's front seven is a complete mess. We saw it last year. It's a bunch of like hodgepodge guys. They tried to go young, and then they realized, hey, this isn't working out. They had to sign Yannick Ngakoue, who's like older than me. So I think that's sort of where I'm going. I want to spend up and get Henry, and there's not a ton of receivers that I love this week outside of one, but that's how I'm starting. But I'll defer to you guys. Bill, how are you approaching wide receivers, running back strategy? Are you spending up at one? Are you spending down at others?
Yes. Personally, and this is a DraftKings only take, as that's where most of my action is. I'm saving at running back and I'm spending up at receiver. I think because I'm locked in on Justin Herbert, I want to play Keenan Allen because that's where most of his targets are going to go. And then I like the idea of either Tyreek Hill or Justin Jefferson in cash. I think I would lean Tyreek Hill for the added correlation. I actually have him projected for more DraftKings points.
Can I stop you just for a second? Why
Sure.
wouldn't you go Austin Eckler and guarantee yourself every touchdown that they have? And maybe double dip?
Not a bad idea. Not a bad idea. I mean, I'm definitely going to be doing that in tournaments some.
Like if you're thinking about just, let's say that the Chargers score 4 touchdowns and you're on the Chargers and you're paying up for Justin Herbert. I don't know what Eckler's price is. Is it prohibitively expensive?
It's up there.
Yeah, it's up there. But if you get 4 touchdowns out of those guys and Eckler gets at least 1, I almost like that better than the 73 of Keenan Allen, but I'll let you go ahead and finish.
Yeah, I mean, that was pretty much what I was getting at. And then that would force me into probably a Chris Godwin type of play at 5,900 for the third wide receiver, or like a Christian Kirk's price looks pretty soft. He was only below his current $5,600 salary twice all year last year. And then my flex would probably be a cheap wide receiver. And I think there's a few names there for cash and probably a few more that look like they're going to open up with some injuries that we could discuss.
Yeah, Jaden Reed, Marvin Mims, these guys you're just hoping for 4 catches for 40 yards. But hey, I mean, if you get 8 points on 3,000 salary, they're going to be popular. I think Josh Downs could also see some. Jeff, do you have a preference of any of these guys? I know you're locked into some of these dynasty type lower end players, or do you have another strategy you're approaching for this week?
I have to imagine Marvin Mims is just going to be very, very popular on FanDuel, having a minimum salary over there. And so I think that what that opens up, people will be crushing that. I like George Pickens' price on both sites a little bit. I think that we saw some growth in the preseason there relative to some of their other options. I know that 49ers game might be a little bit of a mess, but that's one that has kind of stood out to me. On DraftKings, I think Miles Sanders, 5,600. I think that he's going to be used. We saw in Carolina in the preseason really struggled to protect Bryce Young. And so I think that they've already talked about using Miles Sanders as a 3-down back. And so he's got the injury that he's nursing a little bit, but I think that's a good situation where he could step into some PPR upside. You know, you hit Dobbins. Dobbins was right on the top of my head. Alexander Mattison, I think, is one that on both sides where that game could turn into a little bit of a shootout, and we're sure he's going to get the goal line touches, if not almost all the touches in the Vikings backfield. And then Jamal Williams on DraftKings was another one that stood out to me where you talked about that Saints and Tennessee game being a potential shootout. Just those are some opportunities, I think, to open up some money to use in other areas.
Yep, I'll throw one more in there if I could, because Madison was on my list. Jamal Williams was on my list. One guy who I like a little bit more than Madison, and it's kind of surprising because it's on DraftKings and he doesn't catch passes, but I really like the spot and the price on Kenneth Walker at 6,000. Seattle is one of the biggest home favorites on the slate. I truly cannot name a Rams defender outside of Aaron Donald. At 6K, just looking at what he could do on a normal week, 3X seems to me like a floor. And even on just rushing, 30 plus DraftKings points is definitely within his range of outcomes. I'm not worried about Zach Charbonnet, who I saw show up at number 3 on the depth chart this morning. And that might be much ado about nothing. But Walker is so good on base downs. I just have trouble imagining that they drafted Charbonnet to encroach on that role. I think they drafted him for a different role that Walker doesn't fill and does just fine without filling it. So I'm in on Kenneth Walker. I think he's like Alexander Madison without a few catches, but with a better matchup. And both of them are in similar spots. So I'm thinking for me, it's one of those 2 at running back along with Jamal Williams and cash. And then I'm spending up at wide receiver.
So the name I haven't heard, and I guess there's 2 names that I want to talk about just really quickly. Raheem Mostert.
Yeah.
We've talked about Miami. We've talked about this game. 5,200? Like, I'm in. 4.9 yards a carry last year. He's a good running back. Volume's just always been the question. Health's been the question. I think spending in that mid-range there's a lot of good options. And we know the Chargers are just abysmal stopping the run, and they have been for a long time. I do like Mostert this week. And then Michael Thomas is a name I want to bring up. We talk about health, and we talked about the Chargers. Maybe it's a GPP play because he's boom or bust, but 5,100, and maybe it's my Ohio State bias. But I can't quit this guy. Like I talked about Tennessee not being able to stop the pass. Chris Olave, he's Chris Olave. He's going to be good. But I think if there is a complimentary piece, maybe a more GPP play, just because people might be overlooking him there. So it sounds like the consensus is, just to summarize cash a little bit, I do want to talk about tight ends. Maybe their tight end is just hit whoever you can. But Jeff and I are spending in the mid-range at the quarterback position. Phil's going up. Sounds like a majority of us are spending in that mid-range, the 5 to 6K range on DraftKings, and that 6 to 7K range on FanDuel. And then sounds like we have some money. So are we going Tyreek Hill or are we going Justin Jefferson? I'm going Jefferson.
Yeah, I think so. You look at price-wise on FanDuel, I think invites you to Jefferson a little bit more. DraftKings, I mean, it's up there, but I just think there's so much that you can save. And I guess it kind of comes down to if you're going to use Madison or not, and you want to double up on that Vikings offense. That might be a question that you might be facing, because I do think that Madison is sitting in a good range in the running backs right now.
On which site?
Actually, I think his price is okay on both sides.
65 is a little high on DraftKings, but I do think he's a better play on FanDuel.
Yeah,
I'm just looking at the lineup. If you go Richardson in like 3 of these 65 or 6,000 running backs, maybe a Jamal Williams in there, you can get Justin Jefferson, Michael Thomas, going back to Michael Thomas, and you can get a $7,000, $7,500 receiver. And if you don't like Michael Thomas, you can get 2 guys in the 6s. So I do think there's some money here, whether it's, maybe it's I don't know, maybe you do go Olave if you don't like Thomas, but I do think one of those guys in New Orleans has a big game. Calvin Ridley is a decent price as well. Any other receivers we like?
I want to ask you guys like a game theory question about it, because we see a lot of, I know I'm more dynasty brained, but we see a lot of the rookie fever that kind of, and everybody's excited about those rookies. Do you usually see higher play percentages on rookies early in the season, or due to the lower prices? And is that an area that maybe it's more of a GPP to move away from those a little bit because people are going to be targeting those guys? But is that something that you usually see?
To be honest with you, I can't really speak to it just because I haven't looked at the numbers. I mean, just kind of looking through overall ownership around the industry today, I'm not seeing any rookies that are really too far up. I mean, I'm sure that Gibbs would have been one, right? If that game had been on the main slate, especially because it's Kansas City. You know, I'm just not seeing a ton of them climb. I mean, even what do you guys think? Where do you think Bijan Robinson lands? Because he's 8,000 on DraftKings. I feel like that's going to suppress his rostership a little bit.
Yeah, I don't think he's going to. And we could talk about GPP. We can transition into GPPs, but I do want to just talk about tight ends really quickly. Sure. Are we just spending down at tight end? Are we going with this Green Bay guy, this, what's his name, Luke Musgrave? Like maybe he's the rookie that we're talking about at 2,900. Tyler Higbee's a name in cash with Cooper Kupp being out that if I can get there, I'm always a sucker for Higbee. And without Kupp, I think he has 10 plus target upside at 4 to 5K is always a guy that I'm going to be intrigued by. But for me, it's either pay down or go to like a Higbee.
I agree with that. Musgrave was somebody that popped out given his price on that. It's a little bit risky, but maybe Trey McBride from the Cardinals might be a way to go because that's another low entry point that they'll be chasing in that game, I would have to imagine. We saw that Hollywood Brown popped up with the hamstring this week and what's going on with Zach Ertz or not. And so he had a massive game at the end of last season. So that was another name that came up, but I agree on that strategy with Higbee. Dalton Schultz might be a little bit of a safer play too, but that Baltimore defense might stifle CJ Stroud in his first game.
Yep. Okay.
Yeah, I think so for sure. In my builds, I'm probably not going to have a lot of money, so I'm definitely keeping an eye on what's going on with the Green Bay receivers in relation to Musgrave. The guy that I kept landing on, which is kind of weird because this wasn't a guy. There's actually 2 tight ends that I'm very high on this week that I did not draft at all or was not interested in drafting at all during best ball season. The one in cash games I like is Irv Smith, just because I like the game environment there. And I think he's probably going to make his mark if he makes one at all in that offense in the red zone. So I think Burrow's a good play this week. I think he's going to throw a handful of TDs. And Devin might be able to answer this because it rings true in my head anyway. Are the Browns perennially bad against tight ends? Because I sure feel like they are.
Yeah, their linebackers historically have been terrible. So, like, Juan Thornhill's there now at safety, so, like, they should be a little bit better. But the Browns historically have always struggled with just size because Denzel Ward is small. Greedy Williams, when he was there, wasn't physical. So, they've historically struggled with just size in general. So, which is why I mentioned T. Higgins. But I think Irv Smith is fine.
Yeah, and then the only other thing that I would say is that the way that I was building the lineups, if instead of paying all the way up to like a Tyreek Hill for a second wide receiver, if you were to do it a little bit more balanced and let's say play someone in the Godwin and in the Christian Kirk range, right? And you stayed balanced at running back, then you'd have room for Mark Andrews, who I think is like the runaway tight end one on this slate. I don't know that I'm doing it in cash. I would rather rely on the receivers, but if we flip the lineups over at lock time and my opponent was playing Mark Andrews, I certainly wouldn't be laughing at them.
Yeah, at 6,200, you have to compare him to guys like Michael Pittman, DJ Moore, Christian Watson, Chris Godwin. Yeah. Like he's every bit maybe better than those guys. So, okay, let's talk about GPPs. Let's talk about strategy. Let's talk about picks. Let's get a little crazy, a little wild, a little funky. Phil, you're the GPP resident. What's the plan?
All right. So I'm going to have a fair amount of Herbert still. Remember what I said at the end. Week 1, not the time to get cute. I still think that's the game to target, and I'm going to get unique in other spots around that game in a lot of lineups. But as far as the price pivot off of Justin Herbert, I see that as Burrow, who I mentioned briefly earlier. That's the game with the second highest total on the slate, Cincinnati at Cleveland. So I do think that he's in line for a fine game, and his roster percentage might be suppressed because people are worried about the calf injury. Maybe they haven't seen him healthy. And then the other game that I really like is Minnesota and Tampa. And I'm going to disgust you here, Devin. So Baker Mayfield, this is not.
We can't even go for 1 week.
We're here.
1 week.
This is not a play for the Millie Maker. I don't think that he has the ceiling for, like, you're going to take out 199,000 other people with this lineup with Baker Mayfield at the helm. But in smaller tournaments, I do not hate it. You know, I'm talking like 2,000, 3,000 entries.
Trolling me at this point.
I think that Minnesota is going to run up a pretty high score. I think they're going to be throwing. I think the Minnesota secondary, who was absolutely abysmal last year, I don't think that they're going to be much better this year. So listen, you could stack them easily enough. You know exactly where his passes are going. They're going to Godwin and Evans. You could run it back on the other end with either Madison or Jefferson, who we both talked about as premier plays on the slate. That's one way. You said you wanted to get a little weird and a little wacky. You could definitely do it with Baker Mayfield and kind of flip that stack, because I think you're going to see some Cousins, Jefferson, Hawkinson. You know, I think you could maybe bet that game is going to go way over because Minnesota. It's truly that bad. I mean, look at what the Giants and Isaiah Hodgins did to them the last time we saw them losing in the first round of the playoffs.
I understand.
It's not a bad value play.
The first GPP name that came out of your mouth is Baker effing Mayfield. Like,
it's
just a troll. Derek Carr is $400 more, and Derek Carr is a significantly better player and a better pro and a much classier individual than Baker Mayfield. And that's what I will leave it at that. Jeff, Phil's in timeout.
I'm going to join him and throw some gross names in. Desmond Ridder is a name that is dirt cheap, and I think that he can – it's one of those things, the unknown, because we know he's got the athleticism, and he's certainly got weapons around him with Bijan Robinson, and that total is very, very low. But we saw last year the Carolina Falcons game just got wild, and so that's one that if you're going to go bottom of the barrel. The other one, I think if you want to go bottom of the barrel, would be Jordan Love, and with the injuries to the Packers wide receivers, I can't imagine he's going to be too owned, but going against the Bears defense that is going to be atrocious most likely. And that could be one that maybe he's just better than people realize. And so those are two gross bottom of the barrel names that would open up a lot in the rest of your lineup. Sam Howell is another one that kind of in the same vein. He's playing against the Cardinals, and the Cardinals, that's another low total, but at the same time, that could go crazy on what we saw some of the preseason stuff out of Howell and the Cardinals. I don't know if the Cardinals are going to be stopping anybody either. And so those are points where I think you can get low entry, low dollar amounts that will open up a whole lot in the rest of your lineup, and guys that have potential skill sets to bring some in the rushing game and to accumulate some points there.
Yeah, I think Howell's fine. I don't know that I agree with the Ridder just because, well, throwing the ball is difficult. I'm looking at these running quarterbacks, and maybe Ridder gets his points on the ground. I don't think he's as big of a runner as some of these other guys, but like I look at Deshaun Watson, and he's right now 3% rostered at $6,000 on DraftKings. Like, if we forget, this is a guy who can rush for multiple touchdowns in Houston in a game, and maybe it's a different offense because of Nick Chubb, but maybe it's not because Kareem Hunt had a lot of goal line packages last year, and Nick Chubb seemingly disappeared he got him down to the red zone and then they pulled him. So do I think that the Browns need to come up with a better game plan in the red zone compared to last year, where they really struggled and went for a lot of stupid fourth downs and threw some bad interceptions when Jacoby Brissett was there, and then nobody wants to play Watson, like I talked about. So I am thinking about him a little bit. I'm always in on Justin Fields just because he can break the slate. Like he can just at 7,700, he's going to be less than 10% rostered. Like if you're building 10 lineups, give me one, just because like he's a guy who he has 150 yards rushing, which is always possible. Slate's kind of broken. So those are the guys I'm looking at a quarterback. I do like the Derek Carr play, Geno Smith, Kirk Cousins, if you wanted to stack that game, although I do think it's going to get popular. But yeah, I think that we're sort of on the same page, except for the Baker Mayfield thing. Let's go to other players. Phil?
Other players. So at running back, I see the way that the early roster percentages are breaking down. I don't know that there's going to be like true chalk. I think it's probably going to be pretty flat. So if I'm working under the assumption that the cash game lineup that I put together is how a good portion of the field is going to want to build their lineups, I'm thinking that running back is where I want to spend a little bit more in GPPs. And that's where I'm looking at Derrick Henry for sure. Just so that I think I'm going to be constructing a contrarian lineup from the start there. Josh Jacobs is in that neighborhood and another guy that I would consider. I don't know if I should you said J.K. Dobbins before. I like him a little bit better for tournaments because I think he's the kind of guy that could do it.
FanDuel for cash. He's just stupidly priced. So that was
okay.
You don't want to play him in cash on DraftKings, just to clarify. But on FanDuel,
right.
And the PPR thing, Dobbins doesn't really catch the ball that much. So just to clarify.
Yet.
But he can make a house call like from the opponent's or I should say from his own 20-yard line and kind of win you the week that way. So he's the kind of guy that I'm probably, for as long as he's healthy, I'm going to want exposure to every week. And then I've got one other guy, but you said that we were doing like best value play on the slate later. So I don't know if I should save him.
Save him.
He's being saved.
Josh Jacobs and Devontae Adams are both really interesting. I think that one of these guys could pop off, and nobody's really talking about either of them. So I do like the Jacobs call quite a bit. Could this Denver Raiders game be a little sneaky? I don't know. But I'd certainly want to run the ball versus passing the ball against Denver because of Patrick Surtain and some of the corners that they have in the no-fly zone part D. Jeff, where are we going?
So a long shot on somebody that DeAndre Swift on DraftKings at 5,400. We don't know how that Eagles offensive backfield is going to shake out, and I think that will probably be more of a lower scoring game against the Patriots, that Patriots defense, but that's a shot there where if obviously we know the explosive ability on an Eagles offense, and if he finds the end zone multiple times, I mean, that's one that could really pay off there. Some of the ones that are interesting are some of the third wide receivers in some of these offenses that we're not quite sure about. Zay Jones is a name. I think that is a little bit interesting because I think we feel like it's going to be Calvin Ridley, but you saw last year, and especially towards the end of last year, that Zay Jones and Christian Kirk were pretty similar usage. And so that's a name that I think on a GPP against the Colts defense that I don't know if they're going to be able to stop Jacksonville at all. I think he could have a big game. Elijah Moore is really cheap on FanDuel. He's at 3,800 on FanDuel. That's one that, Devin, you had called that game out earlier about that could be a back and forth game with the Browns and the Bengals. And so that's an entry point to that Browns offense and a connection pairing with Deshaun Watson if you go that route. Zay Flowers, too, has not been mentioned. Zay Flowers.
All the Zays for Jeff.
4,000 on, yes, all the Zays. Zay Flowers at 4,000 on FanDuel. I think we saw Odell Beckham popped up onto the injury report today. He's a little bit banged up, and Mark Andrews is banged up as well. And so that could be an opportunity where Zay Flowers just comes in very strong and into that Baltimore offense against a Texans defense that's probably going to be pretty overmatched.
4,000 on DraftKings, just to correct you so the comments section doesn't destroy you. These streets can be kind of mean in the DFS streets, Jeff, so just trying to protect you.
I appreciate that.
Yeah, so if I'm looking at some traps, I don't understand I don't understand the Tampa running game.
Yeah. No.
I don't understand why there's any hype about it. I don't understand why like anybody's talking about it. But like I'm seeing Rachaad White in certain pockets. So he's my avoid of the week. I think when it comes to and it's all said and done, I don't think anyone's going to be on him, but don't get that cute. I think that it's there's no reason to. I'm going to go one more name, and everyone loves to play Tyreek Hill, and I get it. But Jalen Waddle is going to be underlooked. Yeah. And at 7,100 on DraftKings, I don't love him as much on FanDuel because he's 7,900 and you don't get the PPR bonus. But at 71, he's cheaper than Keenan Allen, who could pull up with a hamstring at any given point. And it's fun, which DFS is supposed to be fun, to do the penguin dance with your 2-year-old when Jalen Waddle scores a touchdown. So let's get a little fun. I'm going to play Jalen Waddle, and we're going to do the penguin dance twice on Sunday. Okay, we're going to shift. So any tight ends that we want to talk about? I always forget about them.
So do the offenses. It's okay.
Like Dallas Goedert's interesting. I think Kyle Pitts, maybe if you like Desmond Ridder, I think he could get a little popular though. And then like TJ Hawkinson as a pivot off of Justin Jefferson, I think could be really smart. Just because, you could even do like a Hawkinson alone. I don't think you have to stack him with a Kirk Cousins just because everyone who's stacking Cousins is going to have Jefferson. And there's a scenario where Jefferson struggles and Hawkinson doesn't. And that doesn't necessarily mean that Kirk Cousins is going to have 400 yards. So I do think Hawkinson could be a nice pivot off of the Justin Jefferson crowd if you're into the contrarian type game style and game build. But paying up at tight end could be the way to go this week just because I think a lot of people are going to go down to the what was the guy in Green Bay?
Musgrave out of Green Bay.
Casey Musgrave, like who are we talking about? Or getting chiggy with it with Okonkwo or Irv Smith or these other guys. They're just guys. You're hoping for a touchdown. You're hoping a touchdown.
There is one guy, and I don't know if I'm kind of galaxy braining this take a little bit, but this is another tight end in the same vein as Irv Smith that I completely ignored this summer, and that's Dalton Schultz on Houston. But one thing that everybody should be aware of is that Houston's offensive line is decimated. Like I think they've got, is it 4 starters on IR, Jeff?
Yeah, it's bad.
It's bad. So they're going to have this rookie quarterback making his first NFL start on the road as a 10-point underdog with a patchwork offensive line. And I have to imagine CJ Stroud is going to be looking to get that ball out to his safety valve as often as possible. And he's going to be playing with a deficit for most of that game. In a PPR format like DraftKings, I think that sets up pretty nicely for Dalton Schultz, who I have to imagine the crowd is going to ignore just because, like I said, he was so unpopular this summer. Everybody said, he was only good because he was in the Dallas system, where now I think he might not have a choice but to catch a lot of passes this week. So I like him a lot for tournaments.
Okay, let's go to best value play on the board. Phil, you said you had one, so it'll give Jeff and I some time to figure out what we're doing.
I do. So Brian Robinson of the Washington Commanders is my best value play of the week. Like Jeff said at the beginning, right? Trust Vegas. They know better than anyone at this point. And they have the Commanders, I believe, as a 6-point favorite over Arizona. That Arizona team looks atrocious. So if we're operating under the assumption that Brian Robinson is the early down grinder and Antonio Gibson is the passing down back, this sets up as the game script for the early down grinder. Washington also has a young quarterback that they might be looking to protect a little bit early in the season by leaning on the run. And at 5,100, even if he's not catching a lot of passes on DraftKings, I think in that game, he might have multi-touchdown upside. And I think at the same exact price as Jamal Williams, I think Williams might end up being the more popular of those two. So I think he makes for an interesting price pivot, and definitely someone who in the optimals is coming up very, very high right now and doesn't seem to be catching a whole lot of ownership.
I like it.
That's a
Jeff,
good call.
You have one? It can be somebody who we've already talked about. It doesn't have to be somebody new.
Well, I'll give you somebody new, though, because it's Cortland Sutton. I think is a guy we haven't mentioned him yet. He's going against that Raiders defense. We know that Raiders defense has been exploitable in the past, and with Jerry Jeudy out of the lineup, their other targets are Marvin Mims, the rookie in his first game. Greg Dulcich has seemed to bounce back and forth, whether he's in favor. And so Sutton stands up as a guy that he could be in that Michael Thomas role in Sean Payton's offense. That we saw some whispers of that this summer, and I think he's cheap enough that he makes a very, very interesting play.
If Jeudy is definitely out,
yes.
I 100% agree. It looked like, I think I saw a report that I expected him to be ruled out, and I think I still expect him. Yeah, and I still expect him to be ruled out. I have to imagine once I take his projections off the board, Sutton is going to get way up there.
So I'm going J.K. Dobbins on FanDuel. I talked about it a little bit. And then on DraftKings, I'm going Derek Carr, 5,300. Like I love Michael Thomas. I love Chris Olave. I guess I'll just go right into it. That's my stack of the week. New Orleans Saints. I think
you have me rethinking it. You do.
They're not going to be able to run the ball. I mean, Jamal Williams is interesting just because he can catch, but this Tennessee defense allowed 60. I had it just in front of me. They allowed 62 yards to running backs last year. Give me 1 second. They allowed 63 yards rushing to opposing running backs last year. If you're going to beat the Titans, it's going to be through the air. And Derek Carr he still has a 300-yard game left in him. I think that this is an offense that is going to come out and no Alvin Kamara, but Michael Thomas is healthy for one game. We know that to start. Beyond that, I have no idea. That's where I'm going. So stacks, give me the Saints. I do like the Jaguars too, but they're going to be a little popular. Saints for me. Jeff.
Stacks. Let's get gross and go with Desmond Ridder and Drake London.
His favorite stacks, not gross stacks.
Favorite stacks. The favorite stacks. Gosh, maybe can we kick to Phil real quick and I'll follow up here.
Yeah, I got it. I mean, I've already mentioned some of the ones that I like. It's going to be Herbert, Allen, Mike Williams, double stack with Tyreek Hill. And I'll mix in Jalen Waddle on the way back. Burrow, Chase, Tyler Boyd. I like Boyd's price, or Burrow, Chase, and Irv Smith with Nick Chubb as the run back. Mayfield, Godwin, Evans with Justin Jefferson or Madison. I already dropped that gem on the folks. And then the last one, I think it was it you, Jeff, that mentioned Geno Smith?
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's another pretty good looking game. I just worry that the Rams could stay in it. So in trying to think about how that game might be competitive and high scoring on both sides to stack it, I like Geno, obviously. I love Tyler Lockett pretty much always. I think he's always a pretty good value, no matter the fantasy football format that you're playing. And what I think might be contrarian is that in that stack, I like Cam Akers on the way back because I have not as much faith that Matthew Stafford is going to make it work with Van Jefferson. And is the guy's name actually Puka? P-U-K? Is that how you say that?
Puka Nacua.
It's Puka. Okay. Yeah. So Puka would have been a little bit too on the nose. So Puka Nacua, I think DeMarcus Robinson might be on that team. That is a pretty sad state of affairs. So how are they going to generate offense? I think they might just feed Cam Akers. So I kind of like that from a very contrarian standpoint, probably.
Jeff.
Yeah, Geno Smith and Tyler Lockett was going to be my call out. I had that one. The other one that monitor if Terry McLaurin's out, because I think if Terry McLaurin's out, Jahan Dotson and Sam Howell, I think is a fun stack that you can get in, and that opens up a lot throughout the rest of your lineup. And then hitting back Zay Flowers and Lamar Jackson, I think is an entry point to somebody that you can pair with Lamar Jackson against that Texans defense at a very, very low level.
And you could do a Zay Flowers, Zay Jones stack, and just to have some Zay fun.
I'm all the Zays.
All right, boys, it's been fun. So we'll be back. I think this goes up midday Fridays is what we're expecting every week. For Jeff, for Phil, I'm Devin Knotts. Thank you guys, and we'll see you guys next week.